Mobile and higher. All right, well, thank you all for coming. We'll get started. I just wanted to get us started, and then I will turn things over to David Brannen, our moderator. But I thought, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Center for Environmental Journalism, and I think most are, but for the sake of those who aren't, I'll just say a little bit about the CEJ, and then we'll get started. It was started in 1992, and the goal was to enrich public understanding of environmental issues through journalism, and specifically improving the quality and quantity of journalistic coverage of environmental issues. And over the years, we've come to do that in a number of ways, or at least try as hard as we can. We've come to do that in a number of ways. We have an environmental emphasis in our master's program. It's a journalism and environmental journalism program. We are thinking about ways to extending that into the undergraduate level, and that's coming. We produce journalism, and we sometimes, maybe even more than sometimes, try to do that with students, in collaboration with students. And the CJ is taking students to all sorts of cool places, including the Arctic. We've taken something approaching a dozen students to the Arctic to produce work about climate change. We're going to be launching a new initiative that's it's not been announced publicly, but people know about it, called the Water Desk, which is an independent news organization that will cover water issues in the West, with a particular emphasis on the Colorado River Basin. And students are part of that effort, and we're hoping that fellows will be too. And then we have the Scripps Fellowships in Environmental Journalism, which brings 5 working journalists to campus. They take classes, they work on projects that would be difficult to do in their regular everyday lives. We do cool field trips, seminars, etc. And then that brings me to introduce David Brannen, who's our moderator for tonight. David was in the second class of fellows. The fellowships began in 1997, and David was in the fellowship class of 1998-1999. He has been a science journalist, a broadcaster, lecturer, and author. And he began his first book while he was a fellow, and we've had quite a number of books that have come out in one way or another through the fellowship program. A book called The Beast in the Garden, which is particularly newsworthy now, given what happened up in Fort Collins with a runner being attacked by a mountain lion, and the runner attacking back, and the runner won. A second book was published in 2017, American Eclipse. It was praised by the Wall Street Journal as a sweeping, compelling portrait of the scientific and social aspirations of Gilded Age America. And it's a story about a total eclipse that traversed the West in 1878, and it came out in time for the spectacular solar eclipse that we experienced here recently. David has also been an environmental correspondent for National Public Radio and health and science editor for the public radio program The World. And so I'll turn it over to David to introduce our panelists and the subject for this evening. Thank you, and thank you all.
Thanks, Tom. So, as Tom said, I'm going to serve as moderator. My goal is to provide a bit of structure, but I want to keep this pretty informal. I'll ask questions, throw in a few thoughts of my own, open it up for folks in the audience. I know we have some accomplished journalists here as well in the audience. So I want to keep this as a pretty casual evening. And as for what we're here to discuss this evening, well, it's no secret that journalism is going through a time of transition. In fact, a lot of people would say it's a time of crisis. There's been a kind of bloodletting going on. In fact, just last month, BuzzFeed laid off 200 workers. Vice cut 250. Gannett, the newspaper publisher, cut 400 jobs. It's tough to find a full-time position, and freelancing is more and more difficult. And the demands of the job just keep getting harder. You're expected not only to write, but to blog and tweet and have a social media presence. And yet at the same time, in some ways, it's a really exciting period to be in communications, right? It's never been easier than today to communicate with millions of people with the thing you've got in your pocket. And people are experimenting with new ways of communicating. Folks are starting up YouTube channels and podcasts. So there's no lack of interest in journalism, either consuming it or producing it. The problem is if you produce it, how do you make money at it? Well, if you put 5 journalists in a room, they're all going to generally start griping pretty quickly for good reasons. But I at least want to keep part of the discussion tonight also on the positive sides of why we do what we do, the exciting things about being a journalist today and in the past. So CU is fortunate to have these 5 accomplished journalists on campus, folks who've been in the trenches, working in television and working for newspapers and magazines. And so I want to keep this really very personal and sort of granular about what's it like to be a working journalist these days. What are the challenges and what are the exciting things? So as I say, I want to start with some kind of the positive side, the things that make you want to get up in the morning and do your job, and what it is that made you decide to go into this. So actually, Chris Lett, I want to start with you. And I will introduce people as I go. I don't want to just have formal introductions at the start. But Chris, you have worked at CNN as a researcher and field producer for going on a decade now. And I'm curious, what drew you to television news?
Well, it's funny you say that. I graduated from high school in Georgia. And if anybody knows about educational rankings, Georgia usually is in the bottom 5 of all states in this nation. And when I got to college, I had a struggle, a time to adjust, especially to the academic rigors of a private institution that focused on writing.
And you went to Guilford?
I went to Guilford College, yes, a small Quaker liberal arts college founded in 1837. I was a tour guide at Guilford College, so if
really?
you want to talk to me later, we can talk. But it was an eye-opening experience, and my first essay there was one critiquing TV news. And
that's what you were asked to do.
I don't remember if that was the assignment, but that's what I turned in. And my professor pulled me aside and was like, you have a really good knack here. I don't know why you're in this English 101 class. And I was like, well, because I went to school in Georgia and I need to get all the help I can get coming to that school. And it was one of the best classes that I'd taken probably throughout, definitely my freshman year, but probably throughout my career there, because that's when I really realized that I had a knack for pulling words together that can make people feel good.
Well, so in that essay, did you praise television news, or did
No,
you?
I did not. I did not. I panned it with a lot of fun adjectives and descriptions about how local news tries to catch your eye and begs viewers to stay watching, especially during sweeps week.
So with junk, basically.
Yes.
Well, so then I assume when you decided to go into the business, you wanted to do things differently.
Yes, very true. I ended up in television news and in news period and in media period after kind of having a come to Jesus moment with my dad. I was an AmeriCorps volunteer for about 2 years, and he told me that we're not the Kennedys. I need to get a real job. I'm quoting here. He's like, you can't just volunteer your degree away. And so, as I mentioned, I was a tour guide at Guilford. I ended up walking into CNN Center and applied to be a tour guide there, where if you were a patron of the cable news network from 2008 to 2010, I probably was your tour guide. But it was an amazing opportunity, and I like to think of it like a kind of a golden ticket to a big media flavored candy store. And when I got in, I just pretty much bugged people for as long as I could until I got into the newsroom and started doing some work.
Well, so I mean, some people go into journalism because they think it's romantic, or they want to get famous, or they get high on adrenaline.
Yeah.
what was your main
So
goal?
my main goal was I studied abroad in Ghana when I was an undergrad, and I felt like there was a gap between what I was told and what I experienced when I got there. And my goal was to be able to take my experience there and translate it for other people so that they can understand that people aren't just hanging out in Africa, with monkeys and tigers and lions. And I know it sounds so ridiculous. I'm in a room full of educated people, but even the most educated have a very blind spot when it comes to what life is really like on the ground in Africa, and specifically in West Africa and in Ghana. And I wanted to be able to shape people's perspectives and have an impact on the world through media.
Do you want to change the world for the better, basically?
Yeah.
Well, so Hillary, I want to turn to you, actually. Now, you started out at the New York Post and the Village Voice, although for most of your career you've been freelancing for magazines and other outlets, for National Geographic, New York Times, Scientific American, lots of places. And I understand that one of the things that motivates you is that you really like to explain things.
Like mansplaining.
Well, maybe you can explain. So what does that mean that you like to explain? You're trying to educate, basically?
I guess so. I don't like to use that word because it sounds so, I don't know, elitist, or just that I don't know. There's a connotation to that word that I don't quite like. But yeah, I mean, I do like to explain things. I feel like, kind of like Chris, like there's this whole world around us that people don't think about, don't understand maybe what's really at play, don't notice things, don't know about like how a lot of things work. And I mean, I was the same way and I still am. And so I like to sort of bring these things to light. I grew up in New York City, and I knew nothing about the environment or the way anything actually worked in the world in terms of physical systems. I mean, I don't ever remember a class in high school that taught me anything about like the actual way in which the world worked, like, biologically and ecologically. And so when I started learning about all that stuff, it was fascinating. And then as I talked about it with people, I discovered that a lot of people don't actually know a lot of the ways that the world works.
So is it for you that you like the learning or the teaching or both?
I like the learning, really. I mean, that's, to me, like, that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. You ask that generally. Like, yes, this job is really hard, and there have been a lot of times over the last decade or so that I've thought, like, why am I doing this? And surely there's a easier way that I could make some money and, not be so stressed out all the time. But that's the thing that I would miss. Like, there's nothing cooler than starting to research a new topic and,
right.
Digging into it and talking to people and learning stuff. And that's really what it is. And so I hope that, like, through my stories, I'm somehow bringing that same kind of joy of knowledge to other people. One would hope, without depressing them too much about the topics.
Well, so Elizabeth, I don't know if you would agree with that. So you also freelance for many of the same outlets, actually, and have written 3 books, and have a tendency to focus on topics that others might at times avoid. One of your books, Garbage Land, about trash. You recently wrote a very interesting piece for National Geographic it was reported from India, that was about
open defecation.
Defecating
in the open.
Outdoor, as like 1 billion people do worldwide. So now what draws you to topics like that, if there is something in particular?
Yeah. So I concur with Hillary about this eagerness to find stuff out, and especially things that people that are kind of unmarked and don't get a lot of attention. And garbage is one of those things. We all know about garbage, but we don't really know where it goes. It's a great mystery. And I guess I've said this before, but when you pitch stories like this, like, there's plenty of room at the bottom. People are not, it's not like covering celebrities. People are fighting over each other, climbing over each other to get those assignments, and no one is fighting to write about sanitation in India. But that is an idea that they came to me to write. That I didn't come up with that. but
They
they
knew you
came
were the
to me,
person.
and I was the person for the job. Yeah.